everyone. Welcome to the ABLE Learning Session number 9, presented in partnership with Colorado Post as part of our ABLE Colorado initiative. We are so glad to have y'all here with us today. We have with us two of our national instructors, Bill Walsh and Scott Huntsberry, who are going to be answering some of our frequently asked questions. So we have some questions that have been submitted in advance here, but if you would like to, feel free to put any of your own questions in the chat and we will get to those. So to start off, I am Lisa Kurtz. I'm the director of ABLE, and I will be moderating this conversation between Scott and Bill. So I will let y'all introduce yourselves. Bill, why don't we start with you?
Sure. How you doing, everyone? My name is Bill Walsh. I'm a captain with the Voorhees Police Department right outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, located in the southern part of New Jersey. Been an ABLE instructor now since class number 7. Got involved fairly early on here in the state of New Jersey, which eventually, like Colorado, became a mandated program. We've seen a lot of cultural changes in our agency thanks to the ABLE curriculum, and been delivering it here in our state and our county and also locally. So hopefully I can share some of the experiences that I've seen as an instructor, and look forward to learning from you all as well. Thanks, Lisa.
Great, thanks, Bill. And Scott.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Huntsberry. I am a national instructor along with Bill. I've been with the ABLE program going on 2 years now. So I do instruction at the Train the Trainers, but I also get a chance to travel a good bit and help with recruiting and implementation, different agencies around the United States. And hopefully this won't be one of those stump the chump types of frequently asked questions. We'll have good answers for these questions. So Lisa, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I think between the two of you with the dozens and dozens of classes that you've taught, I think we should have it covered. So we'll start off with a very common one. We know that we hear this a lot from folks at agencies who want to know, okay, how does an instructor respond when someone says to me, really, why does law enforcement need to be trained in active bystandership? We don't need this, or we already do this, is one that we hear a lot. Or why us? Why should we be trained in active bystandership? What would you as an instructor say in that situation? And I'll open it up to whichever one of you wants to start us off.
Bill, you want to give it a stab, and then if there's anything else, I'll see what I can add.
Sure. So I typically come at this from the angle of the pillar on officer safety and wellness. It's the quickest way for students to recognize the validity of this, not just from a reform standpoint or from a corruption program. It is truly for officer health and wellness as well. And how I get into that is I ask them to reflect back on any coworkers that they've had who have either lost their job or been arrested or have gone through a tough family situation, and ask them if there was any warning signs that were there prior to that self-destructive behavior happening. And was it difficult to have that conversation? And maybe did they wish they had that conversation? That's usually my in when I have a difficult student, because every police officer I've ever had that conversation with can immediately name at least one person, normally more than one person, who unfortunately has had some kind of adverse life event that probably could have been intervened upon much sooner. And it depends on the setting I'm in and where I'm teaching it at. So if I'm teaching it locally, I'm not going to share some of the stories to protect the anonymity of the people involved. But I'm speaking more nationally, I actually share some stories of friends of mine who I've had to intervene on, or who I wish I had intervened on, who are either no longer police officers or they're no longer with us, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, so as everyone knows, the health and wellness piece is one of our 3 pillars, along with preventing mistakes and preventing misconduct. So very important to hit on all 3 of those. Scott, would you like to add to that?
Well, I was going to just add a little bit that not to dip into our curriculum too much, but someone who's been through the training, one of the things that we do address early on is the idea that law enforcement, we're actually in some ways a little late to the game receiving this kind of training for active bystandership. And obviously in the course, we highlight industries like the airline industry and the medical profession, where also high stakes, high consequence, high stress types of environment, they recognized the value of active bystandership and peer intervention to reduce the kind of harm that they saw within their industry. So I think maybe that might be part of my response to someone as well who says, why do we have to do this? Well, I think we could benefit from it, and those of us that already do it, and I really do believe that a lot of the folks out there on a day-to-day basis, they do intervene occasionally, or they do have a sense that I'm trying to intervene, I think maybe the benefit of our training here is, anyone who's ever had that feeling of, I wish I've said something sooner, I wish I'd said something more skillful or more artful. In addition to teaching those skills to identify opportunities to intervene, I think we're really doing a good job of providing some real tactical tools that folks can take with them when they encounter a situation like that. So I think that's how I'd respond to that question.
Yeah, I always say, we don't need active bystandership because we're police. We need it because we're humans. And as you said, Scott, there are plenty of other industries that have looked at all of the research that's come out that has said, as humans, we all think that we're a lot better at this and a lot more consistent at this than we actually are. So if you're already intervening, great, intervene more effectively, intervene sooner. If you're not already intervening, let's make that an expectation in the department. We're all just looking out for each other and making sure that everyone gets to go home safely at the end of the day. So absolutely. Our next question is a little bit more into the logistics. So we know some of our instructors may be program coordinators at their agencies, some of them may not, some of them may be involved in training schedules, and some of them may not. So if we have an instructor who went through the train the trainer and then finds out, I'm actually not going to be scheduled to teach this class at the agency for another 4, 6, or more months, what would you say to that person? Scott, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. And again, I guess this is a great opportunity to give a plug to the fact that now when ABLE or agencies apply to become a part of ABLE, one of the early on things we ask them to do is to come up with an implementation plan or a timeline. And I think that's the fruit of some of the experiences that we've had over the last couple of years in realizing that a lot of agencies get excited about getting their folks trained to start the ABLE process within their agency, only to realize through different constraints or logistics, within their agency, that we really can't do it for 6 or 8 months, or sometimes I've heard even up to almost a year. And that's got to be frustrating, because I think, generally speaking, a common theme is I see people coming out of the train the trainer really energized and excited to share this information with their colleagues. And it's a bit of a downer when you realize, oh, wait a minute, I may not be able to do this for 6 to 8 months. Now, okay, so that's in a perfect world, we do a train the trainer and you'd get the chance to start training within weeks. All right. Obviously, we don't live in a perfect world. So I think my advice to someone who's in that situation would be, well, there's a couple things you could do to stay fresh and keep the content relevant. And the one thing I always encourage folks to do is to take advantage of the opportunity to sit in, usually on a Tuesday, during one of our Zoom-based train the trainers. The nice thing there is they can turn off their camera, they can mute their microphone, they can pull out their facilitator's guide in front of them with a cup of coffee and follow along while really good instructors demonstrate the curriculum being delivered. So number one, watch other people teach the curriculum. I would say number two, look around. Are there geographically other agencies where they are already on board and training that, as a certified ABLE instructor, you're authorized to train at other agencies? And even if you weren't able to necessarily sit in and train with a local, maybe you could sit in and observe. So watching it virtually on Zoom, watching it in a neighboring agency, these are things to consider as well. I'll toss it over to Bill. I'm sure he's got some other advice as well.
Yeah, so why I like this program so much is they truly do care about preparing our instructors and also making sure that you're constantly relevant and contemporary with what you're teaching. So just really getting into the instructor portal and taking a look around, seeing some of the videos of interactions like the one we're on right now that you can go back and watch, reviewing the social science experiment handout slides, and just really getting into the materials. But I agree with everything Scott said. Take the opportunity to jump in on one of the virtual sessions. If there's another agency nearby teaching, hop into that, stay fresh with the material. I teach it pretty frequently, but I still always go through my binder. Well, now I'm paperless because Lisa got mad at me, but now I always go through my paperless materials to refresh my memory before on Google Drive. So I think that's a good thing. Even if I have like a lag of teaching or there's nothing coming up on the horizon, I try to just get back into there and take a look once in a while so I don't lose touch with it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, ABLE is not just a training, right? ABLE is a program that is designed to be infused throughout the entire department. So even if you're not teaching ABLE at the moment, you can be talking about it with other folks. You can be making sure that there's an understanding of what ABLE is and what ABLE isn't, just as crucially, fighting those misconceptions that can tend to get spread around, especially if your department has announced that they're adopting a new program, but people don't necessarily know what it is yet. So you can really be an ambassador there to the department on behalf of ABLE and the principles of active bystandership.
And Lisa, before you jump to the next question, one other thing you might consider in this situation would be as you get closer to the time where you will be teaching, so you're a couple weeks out maybe, by then, theoretically, your coordinator should have given you an idea of like who you're going to be teaching with and what day you're going to be teaching. So I can't overemphasize how important it is to sit down with your partner, whoever you're going to be teaching with, in advance of the day that you're going to be on stage there, because it gives you a chance to maybe tabletop. I'm not saying you should spend a full 8 hours and walk through the entire curriculum word for word together, but getting a sense for the ebb and flow of how each other teaches and the particular areas that each feels strong about. It's going to set you up for success and make you feel a little more confident when you walk in there to teach the class.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so we have a question here that we've heard a few variations on this pretty frequently. We know that there are lots of states now that are mandating duty to intervene trainings, that are mandating all sorts of new policies, procedures, processes. Bill, I know New Jersey has been doing a lot of this over the last several years. And one of the things that can come along with this is that we've had some folks at agencies who have heard that officers are complaining that, ABLE seems to be just another check the box training. Oh, is this just another program that we're mandated to do? Is this just something that we need to do so we can get through it? We can tell the state we did it and then we can move on. So how would you respond to that? And Bill, since you're in New Jersey, the only state where ABLE has actually been mandated as training, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so at the time when ABLE became a mandated program in New Jersey, we also had ICAT through Police Executive Research Forum, the Integrated Communications and Tactics, and the State of Resiliency Program, which is through the FBI National Academy Associates. So all three of those mandatory training curriculums rolled out at the exact same time in the state of New Jersey for all 35,000 law enforcement officers in our state. So in addition to our mandatory in-service trainings that we have, our firearms qualifications twice a year, everything else, use of force twice a year, pursuit twice a year, CPR and all those other things, we had to all get all of our police officers to attend these classes. So yes, teaching that many officers in my county here, we have about 2,500 officers that needed to be trained in a fairly quick period. It was challenging as an instructor. There was definitely unfortunately, some hostages in the room. We had to really work at that and talk with them and kind of engage with them on the breaks. And, I think the best way we did that is the passion. I was in a very blessed position where the county prosecutor allowed me to handpick the instructors for our county. So the only people that came to the table were people who were already bought into this and people who I thought were professionals and took their craft seriously. And I think the enthusiasm and the passion for their profession and the passion to drive the needle from those instructors was contagious with our students. So I'd say picking the right people and having a passion in yourself when you provide this instruction to your class is contagious to those students. Your students will recognize when you don't buy into the program. So if you self-actualize and realize you're not the right fit, I have a lot of admiration for you if you do step forward. If you notice another instructor maybe isn't the right fit and you have to essentially able them out of instructing the ABLE curriculum, I don't think that's a bad thing either. And how we really got into this was we'd infuse our own stories with things. So we'd stick to the curriculum, but I would infuse stories about people I used to work with, like I alluded to earlier, or I would talk about situations that we had at our agency that maybe it would have been a lot better for us as an agency and our relationship with the community if it had been handled differently. But I always reflect back on too that this has been mandated for a very long time. So I mean, most of your duty and intervene stuff has been mandated since Rodney King in 1992. So I mean, a lot of this is not new. So I would always reinforce that. And here locally, when I instructed, I made sure I went over before class started all the mandatory reporting requirements that are already in existence for the state of New Jersey, with use of force, with sexual harassment, with racially influenced policing, all these different things that were out there. And then we would get into the curriculum. And the point of that was we'd remind them when we got to the slide what ABLE is not. It's not internal affairs. It's not mandatory reporting. I could reflect back to what I talked about before class started that, hey, all these attorney general directives where all this case law already mandates that reporting. We're finally getting the tools we need, even though we've been having to do this since 1992. We're finally getting the tools we need to do something that's incredibly, incredibly difficult. And we're going to really show you that through the social science experiments, just like Lisa talked about earlier. It's not because you're police officers, it's because you're human beings. One example I always give when I teach this is I was in church one night, I think it was like Christmas Eve, and a few pews up, somebody passed out. And I'm a police officer, so my medical training is not the greatest. Like if you're bleeding, I can stop the bleeding probably. If you're having a cardiac issue, I could probably help with CPR, but that's really the extent of my expertise. Maybe abdominal thrust if you're choking. So I was kind of waiting around for maybe a doctor or a nurse or EMT or somebody much more qualified than me to go assist this person, and it wasn't happening. So I did what police officers do, and I went up there and I started taking action, directing people to call 911, trying to get information about this person who passed out, and trying to make sure services were in place, checking their airway, checking their breathing, checking their pulse, all the things I knew how to do. And then as soon as that happened, guess what happened? Hey, I'm a doctor. Can I help you out? Hey, I'm a nurse. Can I help out? Hey, I'm a firefighter. Can I help out? Absolutely. Sure. Please help out. And then I kind of pulled back and those people jumped in, but it all took one action, me off duty. Going forward, I wasn't advertising I was a police officer. One person went forward to help this individual. And that's kind of, it started this chain reaction. So I try to infuse stories like that, both on and off duty stories, frequently when I talk. Sorry, my New Jersey accent really came through there. When I instruct classes, so that everyone realizes it's not just a police thing, and it's on and off duty. There's opportunities for us to do this all the time, and people generally have a really hard time doing it, not just police officers. Hope that answers the question. I hope it wasn't too long.
Yeah, I think that's a great illustration of some of Dr. Staub's work about the power of the bystander. All it really takes is one person saying, I think there's a problem here and I think we should do something about it. And other people go, oh, yeah, okay. Especially if you tell them what you think that you should do about it. So yeah, absolutely. Scott, we'll go to you.
Sure. I don't think I have a lot to add other than to maybe step back and maybe address one of the earlier things that an agency has to do before they even start the training. And that's if this is a check the box kind of initiative that an agency is looking to, we've done ABLE training, we're moving on. That's a long way to go with all the standards just to have a check the box, right? So I oftentimes when I hear, and to be honest with you, I really don't hear these comments too often, but when I do hear something that sounds like that, it's usually because the folks that I'm talking to don't understand the standards and or what the agency had to do before they could even be an official member of ABLE, right? So communicating the fact that that hey, it's not just a training initiative. Like there's a whole set of policies that are at play here. There's some requirements that are ongoing. It's that requirement that everybody, all the sworn personnel from the chief all the way down to the newest recruit are going to have the same training. I think maybe that dispels a little bit of the it's just some training. But in regards to it's just training, the more I teach this, the more I feel like the 8 hours, it's less training and it's more about agreeing upon a common language and a common set of tactics, right? There's nothing revolutionary about the ABLE curriculum. Like there's nothing that's so unique that no one's thought of it before, right? It's just that we're bringing it together into a package and delivering it to agencies so that they can begin to take the real effort, the real hard work of ABLE, and that's living it day to day. But at least we agree upon the terms we're going to use, the tactics we're going to use, the reasons why we do it, maybe these understanding the inhibitors that makes it difficult. But as you said, Lisa, in your feedback, that this is about creating and sustaining a culture where folks feel like they're not going to be punished either formally or informally for intervening, and that they're also in a position to accept an intervention because they realize that their colleague really does have their best interest at heart. So, yeah, maybe that's how I'd respond to that particular
And I
question.
think that leads us perfectly into our next question, which is about what might you do if you were at an agency where most people are very passionate about the program, but you have someone who's maybe kind of high up, maybe even on the command staff, who either just hasn't really embraced ABLE, hasn't learned about it, or even maybe is vocally opposed to it. What would you say to an instructor who's trying to navigate that situation at an agency?
It might be time to put ABLE to practice, right? You might have to go and report that person. talk with the person who's, everyone has a boss, right? So maybe I have to talk with the person who's that person's boss. Or, I typically try to start with the individual before I start going to the supervisor and, ask, what is your issue with this? Why are you adversarial with it? Help me understand why you're taking this approach. Maybe it is just a misunderstanding. Maybe they're thinking this is something that it isn't. Maybe they've been wronged by the organization for having intervened on someone before and it was handled improperly. There may be all kinds of different stories as to why that person is the way they are. So maybe just having a conversation with them. But if it's totally not working, you might have to go over that person's head, and for the betterment of the agency and for the good of the profession, you might have to take it a step further. But hopefully, usually I've always found that the conversation between the person and you will solve most issues. Maybe even just calling them out on it might help. But be prepared to do something more if you need to.
And I would just piggyback a little bit on what Bill's saying is that your agency should have a dedicated coordinator. Now, maybe you are that person, right? But I would say that this is a scenario where maybe you find yourself as a able instructor, but you don't quite feel comfortable going to the major who you've heard is saying some negative things. Well, gosh, we just talked about this idea in able training, right? You could find the delegate. And I think the program coordinator is uniquely situated to probably be that person. Not necessarily because he or she has a one-on-one direct communication with, let's just say, this hypothetical major that might be saying some things, but he or she should have the ear of the chief, right? Because in that coordinator position, they're uniquely situated to be able to say, listen, not for nothing, boss, but things are going pretty well, but you should know that a member of the command staff is saying X, Y, Z, and let him or her address that, because they wrote a pretty big check, not literally, but they put themselves out when they said, yeah, we're going to join ABLE, and I'm writing this letter to support it. And the last thing they probably want to see happen is a member of their own command staff undermine something that he or she is, if not passionate about, at least sees the value of in their agency. So take advantage of that program coordinator.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point. Your chief has signed off on this. Your chief wrote a letter of support for ABLE. So everyone on the command staff should be aware that the chief is really committed to this. And so I think it's, can be helpful to leverage that commitment in these conversations. But ideally, you want that member of the command staff to really embrace ABLE and to understand what it is and what it's about. And so I think, as Bill said, sometimes just having that conversation, clearing up any misconceptions, talking about how ABLE can work or even has worked for you can be really helpful in just moving the needle. I think it's similar to things that I've heard Scott and Bill, both of you, say about dealing with students in class who might be pushing back, who might be antagonistic, that a lot of times you just talk to them and say, hey, what's going on? Why aren't you into this? And more often than not, it's something that you can kind of come to terms with and find a resolution and even maybe get that person on board. So terrific. We have a few questions now that were submitted in advance by folks who signed up for this session. So first, we have someone who says, I have a really great video of an intervention happening at my agency on body-worn camera. I want to show it off. I know ABLE doesn't allow for changes to the curriculum, so what can I do with this video? Scott, you want to start us off?
Yeah, send it to me, first of all. No, I'm just kidding. I'm trying, actually, and no, all kidding aside, I am trying to collect as many of these videos and actually starting to get some that are really very compelling. So answering one is, please let me know about it if you're willing to share. And you're right. The question is proper in the way it's stating that we really are asking you not to adapt the curriculum to make use of your own videos. But there's nothing that says you can't use this as something to either market the program internally, whether you have an intranet site where you can post videos, or if you have an external social media account where you want to brag a little bit on how the agency is doing. So there's certainly nothing prohibiting you from doing that. So those are a couple of options there. And I would say, tongue in cheek, obviously I'd love to get a copy so we can do some things here. I would think just let Georgetown know, because Georgetown is also collecting these and trying to develop some marketing materials that not only highlight agencies that are doing great things, but to help show the efficacy of what we're doing, and that you can see when people are intervening, it's, again, saving lives, saving careers, and promoting those officer health and wellness opportunities. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, please send any videos to able@georgetown.edu. We would love to see them and, possibly even help you promote them. Bill, anything to add?
Yeah, so we use those videos, and we kind of let the officers know. We reinforce the behaviors that we've seen. So I'll email an officer, say I just randomly watched one of your body worn camera videos, and I saw that this particular suspect was kind of getting under the skin of the other officer, and I saw what you did, and you took over the transport, and that's exactly the kind of professionalism we want to see here, and you're taking care of one another, and that's the purpose of this program. So anytime we see things like that, even if it's something that's not really majorly like huge, to us that is huge. So just kind of reinforcing that behavior. We do the same thing with, with some of the other trainings we've had our officers go to, where when we see it on the video, we label it. You did X, Y, and Z. That's what your training taught you. You're acting as a professional. Thank you. Because oftentimes we're focused so much on the negative in law enforcement, and we always accuse the media of that. But oftentimes we're doing it ourselves. So finding the positive too, and just reinforcing that behavior and thanking the officers for taking it seriously.
Yeah, I think that's such a huge part of making Able feel like it's really a part of the culture is pointing out when it's gone well and celebrating, with permission, the people who were involved in that situation.
Lisa, can I add one more quick thing? Bill said something that it's a great point, right? And obviously, when it's the big life or death types of situations, people almost intuitively know I've got to do something. We obviously see the situations where they don't, and they usually make horrific videos, and we all have to pay the price for those videos. But generally speaking, something kicks in within most people when they see something traumatic in front of them, and I've got to intervene. It's all the little things though that precede that. And I think we kind of call them those little micro interventions. Like it's the small things, those small things that help create and sustain that culture within an agency where it's okay to do this because this is how we take care of each other. So yeah, Bill, back to what you said about celebrating even the small things. As a supervisor, when you see your people doing those small things, you can't underestimate the value of a data boy or a pat on the back when you see those situations.
Absolutely. All right. So next up, we have a question about I'm just going to read it. So, okay. Someone asked us, students are worried that this training will eventually become punitive in nature, where, for example, if a student was trained and didn't utilize ABLE in certain situations, it may become a complaint against them. How would you address this concern?
I would just say that not following the principles of ABLE that you were trained isn't a policy violation, but there's other things that are policy violations, and those things were policy violations before ABLE was even a thing at your agency. So I feel like that's kind of a cop out. Those things are already in place. We already know those things are wrong. That's what we're going to get disciplined on. It's not based on the fact that you have this training. Before we were getting disciplined without this training. So I mean, I'd rather be in a position where I've been trained to intervene or accept an intervention, and then possibly have to deal with some type of disciplinary action because of my failure to accept an intervention, or maybe less discipline because I took it. That's part of best practices for ABLE policy. But I'd rather have that option of having that training to encounter whatever situation is than not have it. Again, ABLE is not creating any mandatory reporting requirements. It's not reporting. It's not creating any discipline issues. Those things are already in existence, or should be, at the agencies that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott?
I don't know how to add anything to that other than to say, before ABLE showed up, it was already punitive. In fact, it was even more punitive in some ways. I think I think that question would have to come from someone who truly doesn't really understand kind of what the goals and the outcome of a good intervention is going to look like. So yeah, in terms of it becoming punitive, well, it should be punitive because we have that duty to intervene. We're trying to help people prevent that. So that's how I would respond.
Right. All right. So I have a question here that has been very relevant to me as someone who used to be a civilian at an agency teaching ABLE training. So if you are someone who maybe doesn't have that immediate built-in credibility, maybe because you're not an officer, or maybe you've been at the academy for years and haven't been out on the streets, Or, you know, what maybe Scott, maybe you have experience as a Fed and not everyone considers that, you know, a real comp. If any of these things might apply to you, or, you know, even if there are just people in the room who have a lot more experience than you do, how do you build that credibility from the get-go so that you know that people are going to take you seriously?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. And you're saying as an instructor, from an instructor standpoint. Yeah, okay. I think one of the lessons that I picked up in my years in the Bureau as a leader was that probably one of the most powerful things effective leaders do is they allow themselves to be vulnerable, right? They don't put up the false, appearance of knowing something they don't or being someone that they are not, because cops, especially, or anybody in law enforcement, they have a very finely tuned BS meter. And when you're trying to be something you're not, or support something that you don't believe in, it's very apparent, and you're not going to have a good day as an instructor. So I think my response to that person would be honest and allow yourself to be a little vulnerable and say, look, yeah, I realize that, my experience does not necessarily overlap completely with the class that I'm talking to. So let's find those areas that we do have commonality. Let's start there, right? Let's build upon that. And then I think then they've given you, or at least you've earned the possibility, a little bit of that benefit of the doubt for maybe the next 30 or 40 minutes. Now it's up to you as an instructor to maintain that connection, and doing that a couple ways. By feeling confident that you know the material, right? So that comes from preparation, and a lot of preparation. B, being making it a two-way dialogue. Adult learners are very different than the high schoolers that we're used to. They want interaction. They want to be able to draw upon their own professional experience as it pertains to the training. And so knowing that and catering to that will also help establish and maintain that sense of credibility. Even if you say, like you say, you're a civilian that's never worn a badge. I think that given the amount of right preparation and open communications, some of the best instructors we have at the national level are not prior law enforcement. So I think it says more. It comes more down to who you are and how you present yourself in terms of maintaining that credibility with your class.
Yeah, great. Bill?
Yeah, Scott hit all the really valid points there. I would just also add that, sometimes the intervention might be better coming from a professional staff member than another officer, because you don't have to deal with the whole concept of chain of command and all the other issues that go with it. And sometimes that can actually be one of the inhibitors. So I know that a lot of officers have had very meaningful conversations with some of our professional staff members about difficulties they're facing either at work or at home or both. So I would just say, don't undervalue yourself, because you bring a lot to the organization. I'm a firm believer we should have more civilian professional staff members in our departments, but that's a whole nother tirade for me. But I would just say that recognize what you do and be vulnerable. As Scott had said, self-disclosure is a really big thing. So there's lots of times when I teach this material where I'll share some things about, I wish somebody intervened on me here, or I wish I'd had this pop up, or I wish I intervened on my friend before this happened. So sometimes getting that information out there shows that genuineness and your care and compassion and your self-reflection.
Yeah, definitely. I think from my experience, as a civilian, I think what helped me most at first was having people who were, real police, the SWAT folks, the folks who are out there on patrol, vouching for me and saying, yeah, she knows what she's talking about. But over time, as I interacted with more officers and had more genuine conversations about their experiences and how the principles of ABLE might have helped them and how these things actually apply to their lives, I think that's where really, hopefully, I was able to build their confidence that, okay, I actually know what I'm talking about. I had, like you said, I have a good grasp on the curriculum, on the information, but also I can acknowledge that I don't actually know what it's like to be out there on the streets, to be doing the job. And yet I can provide a different perspective, and hopefully a helpful perspective, and just engage in that conversation and really try to understand what folks are going through. And so I think, yeah, anyone can teach ABLE effectively. I think it's also really helpful if you have two people teaching who do have different backgrounds, so that you can draw on your own different strengths as well as your different teaching styles, share different experiences that you've had, and just relate to people in different ways. Scott?
And don't forget with some subtle differences that we kind of tweak for a law enforcement environment, the motivators and the inhibitors, they're universal, right? This is a common human experience. We're just directing it into a law enforcement environment. So, I don't feel intimidated because you don't know what what it feels like to be inhibited. We all do, regardless of whether you wear a badge or not.
All right, so in a moment, we will transition into open office hours, but first I want to ask Bill and Scott, do you have any final words of wisdom that you want to leave our instructors with, either about teaching ABLE or just, being in an ABLE agency?
What you measure is what you value. So if you're not, labeling these things, if you're not praising the behaviors you're seeing, the changes in the culture, they're going to become extinct. So try to infuse this. This is an organization-wide culture shift. It's not just a training curriculum. So recognize that, recognize the 3 pillars, incorporate them into policies, incorporate them into training, and recognize your people for their efforts. Don't forget your professional staff either. That was a good hint a couple minutes ago for that. Oftentimes they feel very neglected also. So just keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate the fact that everyone's taking this seriously and they're coming to learn more to sharpen the sword. So thank you. Stay safe.
Thanks, Bill.
And I just build on what Bill said about it being a culture shift or a cultural realignment or adjustment there. Those things are slow. They take time, right? I've yet to speak to anyone from an agency who had an overnight experience of like, well, one day we were this way and the next day everything was working perfectly for ABLE. And so that being said, from an instructor standpoint, I can see it can feel a little bit demoralizing sometimes when you feel like I just taught an 8-hour class and I'm not sure if it clicked or if people are connecting or if they're getting the message or if they're hearing what I had to say. I would say trust the curriculum. They're hearing you. Be patient. Realize that the training is just the beginning of the cultural shift that we're looking for here. And every time you stand in front of a class, you're showing that you care, and B, it's a brave thing to do. So just keep the faith that change is slow, but change is happening.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you to everyone for attending live and watching on our instructor portal and our YouTube channel. As always, if you have any questions or if you'd like to share any feedback with us, please feel free to reach out to able@georgetown.edu. If you'd like to learn more about our Colorado initiative, you can reach out to us or reach out to ableco@denvergov.org. Also remember that the instructor portal has all of our upcoming Train the Trainer dates with links to register, as well as the most up-to-date resources related to the curriculum. Thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate you taking the time. Scott, Bill, and I will hang on for a while here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much for joining us.